So very good evening to all of you. So welcome back to the next session. So actually last class we had studied about mitral stenosis and its actually pathophysiology, the management, the symptoms, signs and symptoms, and how we manage the patients. Okay, so that is what we saw about in mitral stenosis. So we have to keep in mind that we have to anticoagulate the patient, especially with warfarin in severe mitral stenosis patients, vitamin K antagonist. That is what is indicated in those patients. So we need to keep in mind that we have to look out for clots. We need to see whether the patient is complicating with atrial fibrillation, and then we have to give them anticoagulation. So let us move on to the next topic, which is actually mitral regurgitation. So mitral stenosis was inappropriate opening of the valves. So mitral regurgitation will be inappropriate closure of the valves. Okay. So let us now see what is happening in this mitral regurgitation. So most of the times what we see is it will be a combined lesion of MS plus MR. Okay. When we see rheumatic heart disease patients, the most common presentation will be MS with MR. Then they will have pure MS or they can have pure MR. Pure MR. But this is not very common. Pure MR is not very common. MS plus MR actually contributes to the most amount of patients, and pure MS will be the next category. So when the patient is having MS plus MR, we need to see which is the predominant lesion. Okay, which is the predominant lesion. Based on which lesion is predominant, then we can find out, we can have those symptoms accordingly. Okay, the symptoms by which the patient will present will actually vary depending on whether mitral stenosis is predominant or mitral regurgitation is predominant in that patient. So it can be in varying degrees, but the presentation will be mainly based on whether MS is predominant or MR is predominant in this patient. And pure MS is the next variety in which most of the patients will cluster. Pure MR is quite rare, okay, in patients with rheumatic heart disease especially, which is very, very common in India. Okay, so let us now discuss about mitral regurgitation. We'll also discuss the pathophysiology, the types and how we diagnose and the other things. Okay, so let us now start. What is mitral regurgitation basically? So we saw the mitral valve is between the left atrium and the left ventricle. So it is between the left atrium and the left ventricle, left atrium and the left ventricle. Okay, so what happens is when there is blood coming from the left atrium into the left ventricle, what happens is this valve is not closing properly. This valve is not closing properly. So there is some amount of opening left here. So what happens is this some amount of blood from the left ventricle goes into the left atrium as well as the aorta. So what happens is when the blood comes from the left atrium to the ventricle, during ventricular contraction, when the blood is ejected into the aorta, at that point of time, some amount of blood is actually going back into the left atrium. Okay, so the blood comes from the left atrium into the left ventricle by the atrial contraction and the rapid ventricular filling. Okay, what happens during ventricular systole is blood has to be ejected into the aorta. So when the blood is ejected into the aorta, what happens is some amount of blood is coming back into the left atrium. Why does this happen? This is because the valve has not closed properly. Valve is not closed completely. Okay, so the valve is not closed completely. I told you the basic function of the valves is basically to allow single one-way flow. Okay, the blood flow is allowed in only one direction. That is the basic work of the valve. Okay, that is the basic function of the valve. So when this is defective, what happens when the valve is not closed properly? When the ventricle contracts in that high pressure, what happens is some amount of blood is going back into the atrium. That is called regurgitation. Okay, that is called leakage flow, or it is also called regurgitation. This happens in the ventricular systole when the aorta is also receiving some amount of blood. Okay, that is what we call. So you can see some amount of blood is actually going into the atrium. Okay, so this is what happens in mitral regurgitation. So what are the causes? How do we classify mitral regurgitation? Okay, we'll look at that. Mitral regurgitation, we basically categorize it into two types. Okay, so based on the duration and based on the cause. Okay, so based on the duration, what do we do? Based on the duration, it can either be acute MR or chronic MR. Acute MR or chronic MR. And based upon the cause, what can it be? can either be primary or secondary. Can be primary or secondary, can be acute MR or chronic MR. So MR, how do we classify? Mitral regurgitation, we classify it based on the duration or the cause. If it is based on the duration, it will be acute mitral regurgitation. If it is based and chronic mitral regurgitation. If it is based on the cause, it will be primary mitral regurgitation or secondary mitral regurgitation. Okay, so when do we say primary mitral regurgitation? So to say primary mitral regurgitation, what do we need to have? For primary mitral regurgitation, the pathology should be in the leaflets or the valve apparatus. Pathology in the leaflets or valve apparatus. This is very, very important to understand. So like we say primary disorders, primary mitral regurgitation is when the pathology lies in the leaflets or the valve apparatus. Okay, so that is what we will see. Okay, when do we see this primary pathology? Primary is when, suppose like rheumatic heart disease. Rheumatic heart disease is basically affecting the leaflets, is it not? So it is a primary pathology. Okay, so if there can be infective endocarditis. Infective endocarditis again affects the leaflets. It is affecting the leaflets directly. In that case, then it will be a primary mitral regurgitation, primary pathology of mitral regurgitation. Okay, when do we call it as secondary? When do we say it is secondary? When there is some other pathology in the heart which is actually producing a mitral regurgitation. Is it not? There is some other pathology in the heart which is actually causing this mitral regurgitation. Okay, so let us take an example. We can say ischemic heart disease. Okay, so the patient has developed an inferior wall MI. Okay, we commonly see that inferior wall MI patients are associated with an MR. But why is it so? So inferior wall MI patients are associated with an MR lesion, mitral regurgitation lesion. Why do they develop that? That is because, as we have seen, this is the valve apparatus. We have some cord here connecting to the papillary muscles. So we have the papillary muscles here. These papillary muscles, there are two types. Okay, these papillary muscles are actually of two locations. There are two in number. This is anteromedial and posterolateral. Anteromedial and posterolateral. These papillary muscles are two in number. It is anteromedial in location and posterolateral in location. What happens is this posterolateral papillary muscle is actually supplied by the right coronary artery. It is supplied by the right coronary artery. This posterolateral papillary muscle is supplied by the right coronary artery. So as we all know, inferior wall MI, it is caused by the right coronary artery affection. Okay. So when the right coronary artery is blocked, we get an inferior wall MI. So what happens when this inferior wall MI happens? The right coronary artery's blood supply is cut off. Is it not? So when this right RCA territory is cut off, this posterolateral papillary muscle actually loses its blood supply. So because of that, it ruptures. This papillary muscle will rupture. So when this ruptures, this valve apparatus is actually losing its the function. Okay, it is not able to keep itself tense. The annulus is not maintaining it in a tense form. Okay, so the annulus is not maintaining itself in a tense form because the papillary muscle has ruptured. There is no support from below to keep it anchored to the ventricular muscle. So that is why when this papillary muscle ruptures, what happens is this valve apparatus fails and there is leakage of blood. So what happens? This blood comes from the atrium to the ventricle, and again there is some regurgitation of blood into the atrium. So this is because of papillary muscle rupture. So we saw now in some conditions like ischemic heart disease, what happens? The patient can have an inferior wall MI. The patient can develop a MR lesion because of the papillary muscle rupture. Okay, this is one simple example. So this is what we call when the pathology is primarily in the leaflets or in the valve apparatus, we call it as a mitral regurgitation, primary mitral regurgitation. But when this mitral regurgitation is actually associated with some other lesion in the heart which is actually producing this mitral regurgitation, in those patients we call it the secondary mitral regurgitation. Okay, primary and secondary. So what about this chronic and acute MR? So chronic is basically how we see in rheumatic heart disease. It happens over a long period of time. Okay, that is chronic MR. When does this acute MR happen? Like we discussed now, it can be because of papillary muscle rupture. Papillary muscle rupture. Okay, papillary muscle rupture, or the chordae can get detached. Chordae detachment. Okay, so papillary muscle rupture or chordae will get detached. All these conditions can produce an acute MR. So what happens in acute MR is different from what happens in chronic MR. The pathology will be slightly different because of the duration, is it not? When any process happens over a chronic period of time, we can see that there will be, the heart will actually try to compensate for those defects. Okay, suppose I'm having lot of blood in my atrium, I will try to enlarge myself so that I'm able to accommodate that amount of blood, is it not? So there is some time for the heart to actually understand the pathology and try to reform itself, remodel itself, so that it is able to maintain the cardiac output. In the ultimate, what is needed is it has to maintain its cardiac output, is it not? That's what the heart is actually trying to do. So in the chronicity, when there is a chronicity, the heart is actually trying to remodel, and it is trying to alter its structure, alter its function, so that it is able to maintain an effective cardiac output. The heart is trying its best to do all these things. So what happens in acute MR, the presentation in acute MR will be different from what happens in a chronic MR. Okay, so it will be a primary or secondary MR based on the cause. It will be acute or chronic MR based on the duration. Okay, so let us now see. So in primary MR, the most common will be myxomatous degeneration. What do we mean by myxomatous degeneration? There is some amount of degeneration in the collagen material of the valvular tissue. Okay, there is some collagen material in the valvular tissue. When there is some myxomatous degeneration happening, the quality of the collagen is altered. So in that case, myxomatous degeneration occurs. So that is one of the most important causes of primary mitral regurgitation. The next can be leaflet prolapse, infective endocarditis, or the other more important one, rheumatic heart disease. It will be rheumatic heart disease. So when do we see secondary MR? Yeah, like I told you, it is in ischemic heart disease, inferior myocardial wall infarction, dilated cardiomyopathy, HOCM. All these things can actually cause the patient to have an MR. Associated MR will be present. Okay, but the pathology will be different. Okay, so we need to understand and then diagnose and then actually find out. So we can also have functional MR. So when do we have a functional MR? This is also called a functional MR. Functional MR. Okay, when the patient is having hyperdynamic circulation, at time the patient can develop a functional MR. Okay, so that we will see later. So it is very important to understand this classification. So moving on to the pathophysiology. So how does this mitral regurgitation actually produce symptoms? What happens in mitral regurgitation? Okay, so what we saw, we'll just draw the heart again. So we have the left atrium, left ventricle, right atrium, and the right ventricle. We have the tricuspid valve and the mitral valve. Okay, then from here we have the aorta. This will be the pulmonary veins, this will be the pulmonary artery, and this will be the SVC, which is coming into the right atrium. Okay, this is all the pulmonary artery which is coming into the right atrium. Okay, sorry. Yeah. So this will be the flow of blood in the ventricle and the atrium. So what happens now when the patient is having a mitral regurgitation? So during atrial contraction, the atrial contraction ventricular diastole, there is blood is actually coming from the left atrium into the left ventricle. Okay. So what happens? We'll first see about chronic MR. What happens in chronic mitral regurgitation? So what happens in chronic mitral regurgitation? So when the ventricle contracts, there will be some amount of blood going into the aorta, and there will also be some amount of blood leaking into the left atrium. So what happens now? This left atrial pressure is slightly increased. Left atrial volume will increase. The volume of the blood in the left atrial chamber will actually increase. So left atrial volume increases. But what happens is the pressure does not increase immediately. What the heart does, it is trying to expand, it is trying to accommodate that amount of blood. Okay, so the blood is actually, the left atrium is actually trying to accommodate that amount of blood. Okay, so what happens in this situation? What happens in this situation when the patient is actually trying to accommodate this amount of blood. What happens? You can think about it. You can think logically what happens when this kind of thing is happening. Okay, so this left atrial volume will actually increase. Okay, this left atrial volume will increase, and this left, what happens is when this left atrial volume increases, this left atrial pressure will also increase to a small extent. Okay, this left atrial pressure will also increase to a small extent. So what happens when this left atrial pressure increases? As we all know, pulmonary hypertension will occur, then right ventricular hypertrophy occurs. Is it not? Right ventricular hypertrophy occurs. Then what will happen? We'll have a right ventricular hypertrophy and right ventricular failure. Okay, right ventricular hypertrophy and right ventricular failure will occur. Okay, right ventricular hypertrophy and right ventricular failure will occur. So now what happens? When this left atrium is having so much of blood, there will be a volume overload. Okay, so this will be a volume overload. Volume overload. In that case, what happens? Left atrial enlargement will occur. Okay, left atrial enlargement will occur and all these things will happen. So what are the effects on the left ventricle? So what happens in the left ventricle? We'll see what happens in the left ventricle. In the left ventricle, what happens is initially the amount of blood in the left ventricle will become less. Is it not? The amount of blood in the left ventricle will be less. Okay, so the cardiac output will also be less. Okay, but what it does is it will increase the end diastolic volume, and the end systolic volume will increase. The end diastolic and the end systolic volume will increase. So what happens then? There will be lot of stress on the ventricular musculature. What happens when there will be a lot of stress on the ventricular musculature? What happens then? Left ventricle will start dilating. Okay, left ventricle will start dilating. Then what will happen when the left ventricle starts dilating? Left ventricular dysfunction will happen. Left ventricular dysfunction will happen. Okay, so the stroke volume will also decrease. Left ventricular stroke volume will also decrease. Okay, so we need to see, what we have to see is when there is a mitral regurgitant lesion, the effect will, like we saw in mitral stenosis, there is not much effect on the left ventricle. But in mitral regurgitation, there will be effect on both the left atrium as well as the left ventricle. When there is an increased amount of blood in the atrium because of the regurgitation, it will have a volume overload. So that will cause a left atrial enlargement, left atrial pressure will increase, pulmonary hypertension will occur, right ventricular hypertrophy, and then right ventricular failure will occur. So what happens in the ventricle? The ventricle is trying to compensate. Okay, the ventricle is trying to increase, it is trying to accommodate that amount of blood. So it is increasing the end diastolic volume and the end systolic volume. So it is trying to dilate to actually accommodate that amount of blood. So what happens in this, when it is trying to accommodate so much of blood, the ejection fraction or it is tiring out. The muscles are tiring out. So there is LV dysfunction. So what happens? We have LV dysfunction, left ventricular dysfunction, and the stroke volume or the cardiac output decreases. Stroke volume or the cardiac output decreases. Okay, so that is what happens in a chronic MR. Okay, so what happens in a chronic MR? The pressure, it is basically because of the volume overload. Okay, because of the volume overload, the heart is trying to remodel itself. It is trying to compensate for that loss, and it is trying to dilate itself so that it can accommodate more and more blood. Okay, in that what happens, LV dysfunction ensues and the patient will go into left ventricular failure. Okay, in MS we saw that it was a right ventricular failure. In this we can have a left ventricular failure as well as a right ventricular failure. Okay, so that is basically the pathophysiology behind this chronic mitral regurgitation. Okay, so when this patient is having mitral regurgitation, he is having a failure symptoms. So what are they? It's basically dyspnea, fatigue, and palpitations. When does the patient develop palpitations? When the patient is having tachycardia, the heart is not able to compensate for the increased volume of blood. Is it not? So the patient will have palpitations. They can have associated atrial fibrillation as well. So this is what happens in mitral regurgitation. Okay, we need to keep in mind what are the differences between mitral stenosis and mitral regurgitation from time to time. Okay, so what are the signs? So when the patient comes to you, what are the signs that you will see? So like we discussed in mitral stenosis, what we'll do is we look at each and every one of the factors. Okay, so the first one, what will be the pulse? First, when the patient comes, we look at the vitals, is it not? So the first thing will be pulse. How will the pulse be? Next, how will the BP be? Okay. What about the JVP? Okay. Then what about the other palpatory findings? And then we'll move on to the auscultation. So what happens to the pulse? The pulse, the patient will actually have a lot of blood in the left ventricle. Okay. So what happens then? It will become a hyperdynamic circulation. What is it called? It is called a hyperdynamic circulation. It is a hyperdynamic state. Okay. So what will happen? The pulse will be hyperdynamic, or pulse will be good volume pulse. The pulse volume will be quite high. Okay. The pulse volume will be quite high. Okay. So it will be hyperdynamic pulse. The pulse volume will be good. Normal pulse volume. Okay. Pulse volume. So what about the BP? We saw in mitral stenosis that the pulse pressure will be very less. It will be a narrow pulse pressure. But what happens in mitral regurgitation? The pulse pressure will be wide. The pulse pressure will be wide. Okay. This is the difference you need to keep in mind. The pulse pressure will be wide in mitral regurgitation. So what happens to JVP? JVP will be almost similar, because the patient can have right ventricular hypertrophy. He will have tricuspid regurgitation. The same things will be seen. Okay. So it will be loss of X descent, then rapid Y descent. Okay, rapid Y descent. These are the things that will be present. Okay, so loss of X descent and rapid Y descent. So we saw this patient, he's having right ventricular hypertrophy. So in this patient, what will you find? First, we'll discuss about the apex. Apex is very, very important in these patients with mitral regurgitation, because we saw the left ventricle is actually trying to enlarge, dilate and hypertrophy. It is also enlarging, dilating as well as hypertrophying, because it has to push that amount of blood into the aorta. It has to take a lot of effort. So that is why it is hypertrophy. Okay, so it has hypertrophy as well as dilatation. So what happens? The apex is pushed down and out. Pushed down and out. So what is it called? Hyperdynamic apical impulse. Hyperdynamic apical impulse. Hyperdynamic apical impulse, because the apex is pushed down and out. It is felt in more than one intercostal space. It is felt in more than one intercostal space. It is felt in more than one intercostal space. It is pushed down and out. It is occupying at least two intercostal spaces. Okay, so it is pushed down and out, and it is called a hyperdynamic apical impulse. Hyperdynamic apical impulse. Okay, so what happens when this hyperdynamic apical impulse happens? So what happens is, there is a lot of blood, there is a lot of turbulence. Okay, that is what will produce a murmur. But what we'll see is, there will also be a systolic thrill. What will be there? Systolic thrill. Okay, systolic thrill will be present. We saw in mitral stenosis there was a diastolic thrill in the apical area. In mitral regurgitation, what we will have is, we will have a systolic thrill in the apical area. Systolic thrill in the apical area. Apart from this, you can also have the palpable P2 and all the features of palpable P2 and parasternal heave. All the features of pulmonary hypertension will also be present in these patients. Okay, this will be very, very important. So these will be the palpatory findings. Systolic thrill will be there, palpable P2 will be there. So this is very, very important. Then you understand this. Okay. So next, what will happen? What are the auscultatory findings? Auscultatory findings. So what happens to S1? What happens to S2? What about S3? What about the murmur? Or any added sounds? Added sounds. Okay. So what do you think about the S1? What do you logically think? So the S1 will usually be normal. Okay. Or it will be merged within the murmur. Okay. The S1 will be very, very normal, or it will be merged with the murmur. So you will not be able to find out a distinct S1, or you can find a distinct S1, but it will be normal in character. It will not be loud, or it will not be very soft. Okay. So it will be a normal S1. So what happens in S2? What happens in S2? The split will be widened. A2-P2 split will be widened. A2-P2 split will be widened. This is very important. A2-P2 split will be widened. We saw in mitral stenosis that the split was normal, but in mitral regurgitation, A2-P2 split will be widened, and P2 will be loud. P2 will be loud. Okay, P2 will be loud, and the split will be widened. And this is very, very important. We saw that in mitral stenosis, there was no S3. But for mitral regurgitation, there will always be an S3. The more severe the mitral regurgitation is, definitely you will have an S3. It is very, very important. S3 will be present. It will always be present in mitral regurgitation, especially when the severity is increasing. So S3 is a characteristic finding of mitral regurgitation. So what about the murmur? Okay, what happens throughout the systole? There is some amount of movement of blood. Okay, throughout the systole, like we saw in mitral stenosis, what happens? There is movement of blood is more pronounced in the mid diastole or the late diastole, is it not? But what happens in mitral regurgitation? Throughout the phase of systole, there is movement of blood. Okay, so the murmur will actually traverse through the entire systole. It is not early systolic, it is not late systolic. It is throughout the systole. That is what we call it as holosystolic. Holosystolic or pansystolic. Holosystolic or pansystolic. Okay. How is it? It is a high-pitched murmur. It is a high-pitched murmur. Okay. High-pitched murmur. Holosystolic. Blowing kind. What is the character? It is a blowing kind. Okay. Blowing kind of murmur. It is a high-pitched blowing kind of murmur which is heard in the apex, apical region or the mitral region. Apical region or the mitral region. But what is special about this murmur is it is heard better with the diaphragm of the stethoscope. Diaphragm of the stethoscope. We saw in mitral regurgitation it was the bell. But in mitral regurgitation, mitral stenosis, it was the bell. In mitral regurgitation, it will be the diaphragm of the stethoscope. So it is a holosystolic or pansystolic, high-pitched blowing murmur heard in the mitral area. That is better in the left lateral position, left lateral decubitus, heard with the diaphragm of the stethoscope. Heard with the diaphragm of the stethoscope. Okay. But this variation in respiration is not very much pronounced. So we say that the left-sided murmurs are more pronounced in expiration, but for mitral regurgitation, it is not very, very prominent. Okay, you cannot hear it very, very prominently. Okay, because the murmur is spanning through the entire systole, we will not be able to make certain that clear-cut definition. Okay, so it is a holosystolic or pansystolic, high-pitched, blowing kind of murmur heard best in the mitral area in the lateral decubitus position with the diaphragm of the stethoscope. Okay, so this is very, very important. So like we already told you, there can be some associated murmurs. Okay, so if the pulmonary hypertension, the patient is having pulmonary hypertension, the patient can have loud P2 along with an ejection systolic murmur. Okay, if he is having a tricuspid regurgitation, he can have a pansystolic murmur in the tricuspid area as well, in the tricuspid region. So all these things can also occur. Pansystolic murmur can also occur in the tricuspid region. So these associated murmurs are also very, very important. So we've seen it's a holosystolic or pansystolic high-pitched blowing murmur happening in the mitral or the apical region, heard best with the diaphragm of the stethoscope in the lateral decubitus position, left lateral decubitus position. The variation of the respiration is not very clear-cutly defined. Okay, but you can still say. Okay, so that is what is the murmur. So what about the added sounds? Do you have any added sounds? Okay, but before that, we'll just revise this. So this patient has a wide pulse pressure, hyperdynamic apex which is shifted down and out. You have a systolic thrill. There is a parasternal heave. Okay, S1 will be soft. It will be normal or soft, and it will be sometimes merged with the murmur. Then P2 will be loud. It will be widely split, and you can see the murmur is actually spanning through the entire systole. Okay, it is spanning through the entire systole. Okay, so there are no added sounds for this patient, person with mitral regurgitation. There is nothing like a mitral opening snap in mitral stenosis. There is nothing like that in mitral regurgitation. Okay, so how do you say that the patient is having severe mitral regurgitation? So first we'll look at the echo. Echo will show the jet volume. It will show the direction of the jet. All the direction of the jet is very, very important, and the jet volume as well, it is very, very important. The velocity of the jet is also important in regurgitant patients. But clinically, how will you say? Okay, clinically, how will you say that the patient is having severe MR? The patient will definitely have an S3. Okay, and there will be a systolic thrill over the apex. The ventricle, left ventricle will be very large. So there will be axis deviation. Also along with that, what you will have is a flow MDM across the non-stenotic mitral valve. So what happens is, in a patient with MR, you will find an MDM. Okay, in a patient with MR, you will find an MDM, mid-diastolic murmur, in the apical region. But when you do an echo, you will find that there is no MS. There is no mitral stenosis. But how come this MDM is produced? This is because there is some amount of leakage of blood throughout. Because of the non-closure of the valve leaflets, there will be some amount of leakage of blood into the atrium. So that small amount of turbulence is actually producing a mid-diastolic murmur. Okay, when the mitral regurgitation is so severe, the valve is not closing even during diastole. Okay, so there is some amount of blood leaking constantly. So there will be a flow mid-diastolic murmur across a non-stenotic mitral valve. Non-stenotic mitral valve. So if there is a stenotic mitral valve, you will very well say it is MS plus MR. MR plus MS, is it not? But if it is a non-stenotic mitral valve, it will be a flow murmur. Okay, or a functional murmur or a flow murmur. Okay. So that is how we grade the MR severity. So how will you manage these patients with chronic mitral regurgitation? Okay, how will you manage these patients with chronic mitral regurgitation? So basically they have a right ventricular failure, they have a left ventricular failure. So sometimes the valve apparatus is very, very poor that you have to replace it. Okay, so when the valve apparatus is very, very poor, you have to replace it. But when can you avoid replacing the valve? Because once you replace the valve, you are actually subjecting the patient to long-term anticoagulation. Is it not? So there are some risks associated with that as well. And the patient has to be fit to undergo surgery. Is it not? So when do you actually expose the patient to surgery and when do you medically manage the patient? So first of all, you will try medical therapy. Okay. First of all, you will try medical therapy. But when will you not do a medical therapy? You will not do a medical therapy when you need to remember two numbers in mind. Okay, for mitral stenosis, we saw that the severity will be less than 1 centimeter square of surface area, and the pulmonary pressure will be more than 50 millimeters mercury. Similarly, for this mitral regurgitation, you need to keep in mind two numbers. What is the first one? When the ejection fraction is less than 60%. When the ejection fraction is less than 60%, or the LV end systolic diameter is more than 45 millimeter. In this condition, you will take the patient for surgery. Okay, that will actually help in stopping the progress of the mitral regurgitation lesion. Okay, when the EF is less than 60% and the LV end diastolic volume is more than 45 millimeters. Okay, or if the patient is having more than 30% ejection fraction, and the patient, you are not trying, the patient's medical condition is actually allowing you to have the surgery, then the patient can undergo surgery. If there is no contraindications or the comorbidities are less, then you can have the patient taken up for surgery. Okay, so you need to understand how we are treating chronic primary mitral regurgitation. That is how we treat the mitral regurgitation. How do you manage the failure? It will be basically the digoxin, diuretics, and all those medications, AC inhibitors, all those things you can give. And then if the patient is not responding, then you can take up the patient for surgery. Okay. Next, we'll have a word about acute mitral regurgitation. So what will you say about acute mitral regurgitation? So we have seen about chronic mitral regurgitation, how the heart is able to remodel, how it is able to accommodate the excessive volume of blood, what it is trying to do, compensate and actually help the heart. But now what happens in acute MR? There is no time, is it not? When the patient has a papillary muscle rupture, the hemodynamics changes very fast, is it not? So when the patient is having an acute MR, what happens? A huge amount of blood is there in the left atrium. So the left atrium is very, very alarmed. Is it not? It is having so much of volume of blood as well as the pressure is more. So the left atrial pressure will increase. So what happens in acute MR? In the left atrium atrial pressure will increase. And what happens? There will be a severe volume overload as well. Volume overload as well. Okay. So what happens in that condition when the volume overload is happening? What happens? It is not able to receive blood from the pulmonary veins. Okay. It is not able to receive blood. Not able to receive blood from the pulmonary veins. Receive blood from pulmonary veins. See, what happens is there should be some amount of pressure gradient for the collection or the for contraction and to expel the blood outside. Okay, so if the left atrium has to receive blood from the pulmonary veins, what happens is the pressure in the left atrium should drop and the pressure in the pulmonary circulation, pulmonary vein should be more. When this gradient is there, it will actually fill the left atrium. But what happens in this acute MR is the left atrium is already filled with blood. The left atrial pressure is more. And we already saw that the pulmonary pressure is not that high to actually force itself into the left atrium. This left atrial pressure is very, very high. So it is not able to receive the venous return from the pulmonary veins. So the left atrium is not able to receive blood from the pulmonary veins. What happens then? This blood gets accumulated in the pulmonary circulation and the patient develops acute pulmonary edema. Okay, and the patient develops acute pulmonary edema. Okay, why does this happen? Because the left atrium is not able to accommodate blood from the pulmonary veins. So the pulmonary veins get stagnated with blood and the patient has acute pulmonary edema. Okay, so what about the effect on the left ventricle? So what happens? The regurgitation is so severe, it is so acute that the left ventricle is not having enough blood at all. So what happens? Whatever blood is coming from the atrium, some amount of blood is actually left atrium and left ventricle. So some amount of blood is just coming into the atrium, but lot of blood is actually going back into the atrium. So lot of blood is going back to the atrium. So what happens in the ventricle? There is very little amount of blood. So what happens in turn? This is not being able to pump outside. So this, as a result, cardiac output will decrease. So because the left ventricle is not having some amount of it is having very less amount of blood, the cardiac output will decrease. The stroke volume of the heart will also decrease. So the thing will decrease. What happens in another condition? What happens? When this increases, the left ventricle becomes volume overloaded. Okay? The left ventricle is hugely volume overloaded. So the stroke volume will increase. But what happens when the heart is actually trying to pump out the blood? What will happen is the blood going into the aorta will be much less than what is going back into the atrium. Okay, the blood going into the aorta, that is the forward stroke volume, will be much lesser than what will actually go back as the regurgitation to the atrium. Okay, so that is what will happen. So in effect, what happens is the cardiac output will be very, very less. Okay, at the very instant that this acute MR develops, the cardiac output will be less in the left ventricle. Also, what happens, what contributes to this is when the volume overload happens, in a few seconds, the patient will become severely volume overloaded. There will be a lot of blood in the ventricle, left ventricle, but it is not effectively pumping out. Whatever blood goes into the aorta for the systemic circulation will be very less compared to what blood goes back into the left atrium as a regurgitant lesion. So what happens as a result? The cardiac output will reduce. Okay, cardiac output will reduce. So what happens is the patient will be in severe failure. But the first primary thing that will happen will be acute pulmonary edema. The presentation of acute MR is acute pulmonary edema. The presentation of chronic MR, the patient will not sometimes present to you. He might be asymptomatic. When he presents, he will have dyspnea. He might have palpitations. But in acute MR, it is very, very important. You remember acute pulmonary edema. The patient will have acute pulmonary edema in acute mitral regurgitation. Okay, that is what. So what we do, we have to take the patient immediately for surgery. And you have to manage the mitral valve surgery. You have to take the patient for, and you also have to manage the pulmonary edema with diuretics and other medications. Okay, pulmonary edema management. So you have to manage the patient with pulmonary edema and you have to take up the patient for emergency surgery. Emergency surgery. Okay, that's what you have to do for patients with acute MR. So you've seen about acute MR, chronic MR and acute MR. You've seen that the hemodynamics is completely different between the two just because of the time. When there is time for remodeling, the heart is trying to compensate and is trying to accommodate itself. Okay, when that is not there, actually disease process becomes more catastrophic and the acute pulmonary edema happens. Okay, that is about acute MR. So just a word about mitral valve prolapse syndrome. What happens in mitral valve prolapse syndrome? It is also called the systolic Click-Murmer syndrome. Systolic Click-Murmer syndrome. It is also called the Barlow syndrome, or it is also called the floppy valve syndrome. Systolic Click-Murmer syndrome, Barlow syndrome, or the floppy valve syndrome. Like you all know, the valve leaflets are very, very floppy because the leaflet is actually prolapsing. Okay, the valve is actually prolapsing into the atrium. So that is what we call as mitral valve prolapse syndrome. So what happens is mitral valve prolapse syndrome, most of the patients are asymptomatic. Most of the patients are asymptomatic. Okay. When they do present with symptoms, what will be the symptoms? Most commonly, it will be dyspnea or palpitations. Why do we say palpitations? These patients with MVPS, what happens is they are very, very prone to develop premature complexes or ectopics. It can be atrial ectopics or ventricular ectopics. These patients are very much prone to develop ectopics. So they will have palpitations. Okay, atrial or ventricular, they will have palpitations, and they can also present with dyspnea. What happens is some patients of this mitral valve prolapse syndrome, they go on to develop mitral regurgitation. Okay, they go on to develop mitral regurgitation. So that is when you will actually intervene in this patient. So when this patient is having an asymptomatic mitral valve prolapse, you won't go and do any active intervention for that patient. You just leave alone that patient. Okay, when he's having just a mitral valve prolapse syndrome which is asymptomatic, you won't treat that patient. So when the patient is having palpitations and the patient is coming to you with ectopics, you can give the patient some beta blockers. Okay, you can give the patient some medications to control the heart rate. You can actually correct the rhythm. So that you can do for patients with mitral valve syndrome, but only when the patient develops MR, you will actually do one surgical intervention for that patient. Because when the patient develops MR, he can actually go into chronic MR. What will happen is he will develop failure. To prevent all those things, you can actually do a surgery for these patients who are progressing into mitral regurgitation from this mitral valve prolapse syndrome. Okay, what happens? Why is it called a systolic click murmur syndrome? Because in the systolic phase, there is a click because of the movement of the mitral valve. Okay, because of the prolapsing of the mitral valve, there is some amount of a click produced that is called a systolic click syndrome. Okay, systolic click. So you can see here what happens. The mitral valve is actually, this mitral valve leaflet is actually prolapsing into the atrium. When it is prolapsing into the left atrium, what happens is there is some amount of regurgitation happening. Okay, there is some amount of regurgitation happening. Okay, this happens because you see what we call as zone of coaptation. This is the one leaflet, this is one leaflet, this is second leaflet. When they actually meet here, this is called the zone of coaptation. Zone of coaptation. So if there is any problem with the zone of coaptation, what will happen is there will be a regurgitation. Okay. So what happens in this MVPS? During systolic ventricular contraction, this mitral valve will actually go and prolapse into the atrium. What happens? This zone of coaptation is then not formed. So what happens? There will be a regurgitation of blood from the ventricle into the atrium. So this is what happens. So this is what happens in mitral valve prolapse syndrome. So like I told you, when the patient develops MR, that is when you will actually give a surgical intervention for this patient. But when the patient is presenting to you with palpitations, then you will actually do a beta blocker therapy for this patient. Okay. So this you can diagnose as mitral prolapse syndrome easily by echocardiography. Okay, there are some criteria by which you can diagnose this mitral valve prolapse syndrome. So, but at this level, that is what is important for us. We need to just know about this condition. We need to keep in mind that mitral valve prolapse syndrome can also produce a MR murmur. Okay, so this is what we have discussed today. We have seen about acute MR, chronic MR, and then we have seen about chronic MR, acute MR, mitral valve prolapse syndrome, and that comes to the end of the discussion of mitral valve disorders. Okay, so I hope it was useful for you all. So we'll just see in the next class. We can just continue about these topics in the next class. Thank you so much for listening.